Heyo, I'm Orinum. Okay, so this is gonna be a quicker one because I'm in between videos as I'm writing this, but I just can't stop thinking about Deltarune Chapter 5. Like, y'all, it's incredibly good, and I just can't get it out of my mind. So I gotta talk about Deltarune, I just gotta. So, there's one thing that I started noticing while playing Chapter 3 a few months ago, and it's the fact that the animations are like shockingly good. I don't mean the crazy wacky stuff or the flashy stuff, although that's really good too. What I'm talking about are the animations for the basic character sprites, mostly Chris, Susie, and Rouse, but that's also the case for Lancer, Noelle, and all of the other characters I won't say because of spoilers. Oh yeah, this video will also be sort of spoiler-free as well. There's going to be some animations taken out of context, but I won't be talking about them where they come from or what they mean. This video is purely meant to teach a few things about animating with pixel art, and also shine a light on some of the pretty sneaky artistic decisions made by the Deltarune team. Okay, so first, I think we should talk about the animation we see most throughout all of these games. The walking animations. They're pretty unassuming, and they seem like almost amateurish, right? Or maybe it's like a holdover from Undertale's art direction. But either way, they're really simple, consisting of 2 extra frames, making for a choppy 4-frame loop, reminiscent of a style that's, well, sort of amateurish. But like, Temmie and the rest of the art team can clearly do some fantastic animations. So these super basic walk sprites are almost jarring in a way. They look awkward, stilted almost, especially when compared to some of the more fluid and complex character animations. And so they really take some getting used to, I think. However, these basic animations actually work perfectly for what Deltarune is trying to do. Like, at its very core, I mean. Deltarune is an incredibly emotional game. There's a ton of cutscenes and interactions where the characters express themselves in funny, heartwarming, and creative ways. And one subtle technique in scripting these cutscenes to be as expressive as possible is allowing the characters to move around really flexibly. Sometimes they should move quickly from point A to point B, and sometimes they should walk slowly across the room for an emotional moment. And like, this sort of hyper-flexibility can be a problem if you don't have the right animations. Okay, so let's take a more complicated, smooth running sprite with plenty of frames. Now, let's see what it looks like when it's going at a standard walking speed. See what I mean? It's really awkward, because Susie's legs are moving faster than the ground under her. It's like she's slipping around on ice, so it feels wrong, like it was programmed wrong or something. I mean, yeah, it intentionally was for this demo. But the point is, this shows that when there's a mismatch between the character's moving speed and the speed at which they're actually moving, it totally breaks the immersion. You're reminded that these are sprites being moved around with a script, that this whole thing is a bunch of code and pixels, not characters that we've been spending hours growing to love. So as to keep the immersion as much as it can, while also keeping the animations as flexible as it can, Deltarune opts for an intentionally simple walking animation, and it only uses these more complicated running sprites in highly scripted key moments, when the characters need to be extra expressive. The Deltarune team decided to make an animation that works at any walking speed, and it can be used in basically any situation at any speed, by sacrificing smoothness and fidelity. So ironically, this stilted, awkward walking animation shows us exactly how important expressiveness and immersion are for Deltarune's story. So now that we know its main goals, expression and immersion, let's dissect a few of Deltarune's complex animations frame by frame. The first one I want to look at is this animation of Chris opening and falling out of a window. If we look at the animation frame by frame, it doesn't appear to be anything special. They raise their arm, open the window, climb out, and fall out. It's very smooth because each action has a few frames to smooth it over. Nothing fancy, right? Well, not so fast. If you look at how the game uses these frames, it tells a much different story. First, raising their arm. Based on the frames themselves, I would have wagered that it's a pretty quick motion. There's 4 frames, 2 with Chris's arm closer to their body, and 2 with it extended, grabbing the blinds. Since these two pairs are pretty similar to each other, and also since there's no others, there's a sort of smoothing in and smoothing out going on. Pretty fluid, all things considered. But when you look at how this animation plays out in-game, it's really slow and choppy. All of that smoothing, gone. Why is that? Well, this is technique number 1. Deltarune slows down its animations as a way of showing slow, deliberate motions. Like, imagine if this animation were very slow and smooth, with lots of in-betweens. It'd be pretty distracting, right? This action is supposed to feel very slow, so instead of going for fidelity, Deltarune decides to emulate the feeling of slow, careful movements by intentionally slowing down the frame rate. After raising their arm, Chris opens the blinds. And again, when looking at it frame by frame, this is a pretty smooth motion. And when we look at how the frames are used in context, aha! It's quick and smooth. Totally different from the last animation. Let's keep going. Next, Chris climbs onto the windowsill. The animation is, yet again, pretty smooth when played out of context like this. There's a starting pose, ending pose, and a frame in between to act as a transition between the two. But, yet again, when put in context, there's a shaking animation when Chris changes sprites. Here's technique number 2, and it shows up genuinely all over the place. Deltarune shakes its character sprites around a lot. It's a great technique because it's really easy to do, and it shows a ton of movement, even with a static sprite. In this case, Chris isn't quickly hoisting themselves up like the frames imply. Instead, they're taking their time, moving in jerky motions, almost implying they're struggling to get up. Lastly, Chris falls out of the window. There's no way this can be anything but smooth, right? And yep, it stays that way. So here's the third and final technique that Deltarune uses, pulling out all of the stops, using all of the animation skills that the art team, who's mostly Temmie, I think, clearly knows how to do. Look at this animation of Susie throwing her weapon away after the battle is over. Like, they didn't need to do an animation this complex here. It could have been something simpler, like the last few frames, and that's it. Sure, it's less expressive, but that's fine, right? Well, remember, Deltarune's goal is to be as expressive as possible with its animations, so it makes subtle, deliberate choices all over the place. Susie throws her axe and dusts off her hands to show how nonchalant she is about all of the violence. Rousey claps his hands and makes an adorable little face because he's such a cutie patootie. Because he supports his other two party members, basically applauding for them. And Chris, while they still have a simpler animation in comparison, they physically put their sword away before returning to an idle pose. And their hair and cape thingy, both of these have an incredibly smooth animation as well. Remember, each of these frames has to be drawn by hand, so any decision to make a more complex animation is very intentional. Every single frame drawn is a conscious choice made by one of the developers or artists, and the fact that these complex animations show up all over the place, even in places where it barely adds anything, shows just how dedicated Toby Fox and the rest of the Deltarune team are to immersion and expression. So I think this really brings it home how intentional all of Deltarune's animations really are. If a tiny action needs more frames, then more frames will be drawn. If it looks better with less frames, then frames will be cut. As long as it does what it needs to, it doesn't matter how simple or complex the animations are. Now, I will say, there's another really big part of Deltarune's art direction that makes all of this even possible to begin with. Let's come back to the animation of Chris again, except this time we'll touch on the second half, where they climb back in the window. There's 7 frames, and throughout this whole animation, there are all 3 techniques we talked about, back to back. Smooth in-betweens, a slower frame rate, and sprite shaking. But let me rewind it, and play the animation really slowly, because there's one thing I want you to think about while watching. I want you to note exactly when you could be able to tell that this is Chris, even if I didn't tell you it's them. Is it this frame? This one? Maybe this one? It's probably one of these, right? Which is wild if you think about it. Like, okay, look at this frame here. It's pretty clear that this is Chris. We can easily make out what are Chris's hands, Chris's body, and Chris's hair. But also, this is a pretty complex pose, and this is basically only half of their body. And this is a really tiny resolution. Despite all of that, all of these reasons that this pose shouldn't be read at all, it's still clear that this is Chris. Like, what? How? Well, this is all because of one really smart decision made very early in Deltarune's development. All of these characters are really shapy and simple with their designs. They're drawn intentionally so that their bodies are made up of identifiable chunks, so that even if these chunks get smooshed and stretched around for tons of different poses and expressions, it's still clearly these characters and it's still clear what they're doing. Susie has a ton of sprites like this, where she makes tons of goofy, exaggerated expressions, and you can absolutely tell it's still her. And again, I can't stress this enough. It is hard to make sprites this expressive with so few pixels. It's only possible because Susie's design has a lot of empty space, a lot of real estate for her eyes and mouth to grow into a larger expression, as the scene calls for it. And this goes farther than just expressions too. Look at this animation of Susie slamming her fists. Her face is totally obscured, but we can still tell it's her. We know she wears long jeans, has a long purple coat, and her hair is long and messy. Even from behind, where her design is barely anything besides solid colors, that's more than okay, because we can still clearly tell where her pants, her coat, and her hair are. So we can tell that this blob of blue and purple pixels is Susie. Taking a look at Chris again, their design is made up of flat, choppy, dark brown hair that covers their face, a green and yellow shirt, and thin, dark legs. That's it. And once it's established that this is a formula for identifying Chris, even if it's really small, chopped up, or warped around, we can tell it's them, because it's really easy to identify which blobs of pixels go with which identifiable part of their body. Watch the animation where Chris is climbing in the window again. You can tell it's Chris from the second frame, because that's the color of their shirt. And so this must be their arm. Let's look at the 6th frame. You can tell that this is 2 of their hands, their shoulder, their head, and a tiny bit of their face. Again, because each of these parts is super easy to identify. The Deltarune team made a smart decision to make its characters as simple as they could, all while making them recognizable and have their own identities. It's a very thin tightrope that they decided to walk, but it was so worth it, because at the other side was a huge palette for creating a plethora of different poses and animations. And so that's why Deltarune sprites are incredible to me. They're some of the most expressive sprites I've seen in a game. And it leads to an experience that has some of the most immersive, tactile, real-feeling characters. All because the art and animation team knew how to make it happen. They knew what the limitations would be, and so they honed in on which aspects could be compromised or simplified well before sacrificing even an ounce of potential to keep these characters feeling real and feeling alive. So if and when I ever decide to make a game like this of my own, where emotions and storytelling are at the center, and if I ever decide to use sprites to do it, I'll be coming back to Deltarune. I'll be looking into the Dark Worlds, spending time with these characters, and studying the many, many sprites, because frankly, I don't know of any other game that pulls it off as incredibly as this one. But what do you think? Do you also find Deltarune sprites are this expressive and emotional? Or maybe what are some of your favorite animations? I'd love to make this more of a conversation in the comments. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, it would mean a ton if you considered liking and subscribing to let me know. And as always, a huge shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. They really help make it possible to keep making videos like this, analyzing the technical and the more emotional side of video games. But with that said, thank you so much if you made it this far into the video. And also, I hope to see you in the next one.